Morning, everybody, and welcome to Let's Talk FM. I'm joined this morning by Mark Whittaker, and we'll be talking about how to prepare yourself for reopening after lockdown. Morning, Mark. How are you?
Morning, Adam. Yes, I'm very good, thank you. I'm joined as usual in my temporary office by my Labrador, so I'm hoping that he's going to behave for the next half an hour or so. So if I have to disappear because the postman's arriving or something, you'll know why.
No problem at all. I would be surprised if one of the little people come walking in through the door through this. It's the joys of working from home.
Absolutely, the challenges. Absolutely.
And this is what we're here to talk about, isn't it? Because at some point soon, everyone will be going back to work, hopefully. We've seen a number of businesses sort of slowly but surely opening their doors, especially in the retail sort of marketplace. And there's definitely two camps in being created in thought of this. One, obviously, putting sort of the economy first, and then the other sort of side about life, and the challenges and the balances the government are having to make on both. I mean, I have to say I'm firmly on the life side, and having looked at all the guidance and read a lot of the papers that are being produced, I'm finding this very difficult subject to work my way through and understand what I would be doing if I was looking to open locations. And it was really interesting this week listening to sort of the government change their stance a little bit around what a second phase would be. And that second phase, going from we don't want a second phase to a second phase of we don't want to overwhelm sort of the NHS. And I don't want to read too much into that at the moment, but it was just a change in language as we try and ease ourselves out of this lockdown period. And this has had a huge impact in the FM market. And it's what we're here to talk about.
Yeah.
Suppliers have been talking to me, and they've really seen that the demand has reduced, and some have been talking up to sort of 85% outside sort of their essential support services, sort of hospitals, retail, food, etc. I mean, what have you seen happening?
Hi, Adam. Yeah, absolutely. I think from personal perspective, from conversations I've been having. And even kind of yesterday, I was speaking to a contractor who normally would have around 45 engineers working full time for them. And at the moment, they've got 41 of those 45 engineers on furlough. And those remaining kind of 4 engineers that are currently working are working essential only maintenance and some kind of emergency repairs. So the current situation's clearly seen a lot of engineering staff within the FM arena kind of currently on furlough. Significant number of those engineers and also back office staff and management staff that are involved in project works, for example, that just absolutely ground to a halt. That's just stopped demand right in its tracks, really. So significantly they've kind of had to furlough staff, and it also makes some significant redundancies. Also hearing, particularly from the soft FM side of things, as well as the furloughing of staff, there's been quite a significant number of redundancies that have been made as well in preparation and anticipation that some of these sites, particularly where there's going to be high footfalls of people, are not going to be open for a significant amount of time, and the furlough scheme can only go so far, and they're preparing kind of well beyond furlough and kind of cutting the cloth accordingly, really.
Well, this is the other thing, isn't it? Some of the businesses have had the choice of making sure there's a company to work for at the other side of this. And as you say, furlough's been the first option, but that is going to be leading into redundancies. We just have to look outside the market at BA sort of announcement over the last couple of days. And also, there's going to be a reduction in suppliers because, I mean, I've heard of a number of businesses actually having to close, even though the furlough scheme's there to support the staff. They've had to actually close their doors completely. I mean, have you got any idea of how many or what percentage you've seen in that area at all?
No, it's really difficult to gauge at the moment, and you're absolutely right. I've got kind of friends as well that even in non-FM related industries where everything's ground to a halt for them because payments, for example, have completely dried up because their clients haven't been paying them and they can't pay their suppliers. So there's been significant kind of, I think, in terms of cash flow. Obviously, cash flow is king for a large number of companies, particularly if they haven't got the cash reserves to support them through these particular times. I do think the furlough schemes are calm before the storm, really, and I think that as soon as that kind of buffer is taken off, then that's when the sheer economic reality kind of hits. Demand has to percolate through the economy, clearly, and it's going to take time to do that. And you have, even yesterday, when we're talking purely about the airline industry, when they're talking about kind of demand, will take maybe 2-3 years before it gets to the levels it was pre-lockdown. I think there's going to be significant areas of the economy that are exactly the same, really, that with the restrictions in movements and the working practices of people, that demand and requirements of FM services is going to take quite some time to actually reach demand levels. And it can only be, FM providers can only kind of absorb those kind of costs for a certain amount of time before they'll have to get kind of quite ruthless with the balance sheets and say, well, this is the level of demand, this is the level of resourcing, both back office and engineering, cleaning, reception. We've got to make some changes just to make our business viable. And I think that's those planning and those conversations are going on at the moment. So it's difficult to gauge where we are at the moment, because I think we've got this kind of cocoon of comfort with the furlough scheme. But as soon as that is ramped down as such, I think that's when the hard economic realities are really going to hit the sector, and that's when we'll see a lot of companies, unfortunately, I suspect, go to the wall.
Yeah, and this is going to be the difficult. I think it's just absolutely difficult area that we had a skill gap beforehand. Our demand for services, our supply from engineers and quality engineers as well. Those engineers that we've lost through this process are having to make some really difficult decisions on where their careers are going and how they're supporting their families. They might even be looking to do something outside of the reactive and planned maintenance sector and going into, some I know have taken roles in shops to support. They might not necessarily come straight back. We will see a demand increase. I think it'll be slightly staged. So I don't think there's just going to be this big, huge tap turned on, but I think it's going to ramp up, and I think people are going to want to see that ramp up before the end of the year. And I can see that we're going to have a massive skills gap again, and I think that's going to grow further.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your thoughts? Because this is a key to reopening buildings. If a retailer or a leisure facility wants to open 200-300 locations at a time, I mean, what they're going to be doing it all roughly around the same time.
No, you're absolutely right. The government's got a difficult balancing act at the moment, in as much as you've got the health side of things. The chief medical officer's talking about lockdown and saying, listen, we've got to don't think about short term. You've got to think about that we're in this for a long time. And I think until a vaccination is tested and is ready for the market, which could be months, many, many months away, we're going to be in a situation of this whole kind of social distancing environment for a considerable amount of time. On the other hand, you've got industry saying, listen, we need to bring some business in and cash flow into our business because we are really on our knees now. So it's a difficult balancing act, and you're absolutely right. I think what's happened within the FM arena post kind of the initial lockdown is the fact that it's essential only maintenance. Some are completely mothballed, their sites, some are partially opened, some are operating but on a reduced maintenance strategy. I think Q3, Q4 of this year, there will be more properties opening, but also, just a simple thing like boiler servicing, for example. We'll be looking at September, October time for a number of organisations that will be when they usually have their servicing done, and not everyone's going to be able to have that done at that particular period of time because there's going to be the lag. I think you've also got, when we're talking about supply of engineering, you're absolutely right. Some people may decide to go out of the industry, and you've got some that may well have kind of been furloughed, but you're also going to get employees that aren't going to be feeling safe returning to work. They may be self-isolating, they may be ill, they may have people within their family that are working for NHS, for example, and are really kind of nervous about going back into a place of work where they could potentially catch the virus and also kind of put members of their family at risk as well, where there may be some kind of immunity issues as well. So the supply issues is an important one. And there's obviously, as we know, there's no short-term fix in terms of getting more people into the industry and doing that. It's a long-term project, but I strongly suspect that come Q3 of this year, when the lockdown starts to ease in certain sectors, there's going to be high demand for engineering, and certainly that's when some of the big FM providers are going to need to start potentially recruiting again, looking at bolstering their engineering resource.
Yeah, we sort of talked about it before we get sort of moving into some what I think is some practical questions. I mean, we talk about most of the government incentives at the moment are to delay payments. So they're not actually grants to the businesses. They're pushing a problem further and further down the line.
Yeah.
We're going to have probably a reduced engineering resource because of the current situation. You're absolutely right about their safety at work. I've heard people talking about Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act of 1996 coming into play, where employees can refuse or withdraw their services without being penalised if they don't feel safe in the environment they're working in. So that's I think, going to be something that's rearing its head as we move forward. And let's be honest, there's no legal case or governance that I think we can go back to. This is unprecedented. This is not something.
Yeah.
That's having that's going to have an effect on prices. Surely we're going to be seeing companies wanting to charge more for their services than they have done previously. Have you heard any rumblings in that area at the moment?
I haven't as yet, but I think it's almost inevitable. For example, I had a conversation yesterday with a contractor when they were talking about kind of they would usually historically on some of their PPM works have two people in the van that would be travelling to certain sites. And particularly in some of the working at heights works that are required, they would have two people there and share the van. And the person yesterday I was talking to was saying, from now on, he doesn't want to run the risk of having two people in the same van, so they're operating in their own vans. So he's going to need to increase the number of vehicles within his fleet, and obviously the associated cost is then looking to the client, to our client, to kind of absorb that cost. It's a difficult one, really. I suppose the parallels I would use in terms of the cost pressures is when the living wage was introduced, and there is the assumption from some FM providers that this can then, it's out of their control, it's an increased cost, so they're going to need to pass it on to the client. And clients were turning around and saying, well, actually, no, we can't afford to kind of absorb that cost. You need to look for your own internal efficiencies to absorb that cost. And I think that may be the case of where it goes now. I think there will be some definite cost pressures and some conversations that FM companies may well be having with clients to say our cost base is increasing and we need some support on it. But at the end of the day, clients are in exactly the same situation. They'll have their own budgetary challenges and can't suddenly decide to increase their FM budget by 10% because the supply chain are kind of asking for it.
Yeah, and this leads on to for me, what work are we asking to be done when we're reopening buildings? What work are we asking to be done? Because I'm sure we will see some clients demanding non-essential work through this period. It's just inevitable. And I think there is a big discussion between client and provider about what actually services they're going to offer, how they can offer them. Because let's talk about going to work. You just explained it there by not sharing vans. The guidance is quite interesting in this area. We're talking around that people should be travelling alone. If they can't be travelling alone, you can allocate a sort of buddy partner at the worst, where they only travel together through the work environment, so it reduces their exposure risk. Things like they must keep the windows open, so the vehicle must be consistently ventilated. They must wash their hands before they get in, before they get out. So there are some guidances, and I think that was, well, I don't think it was the Construction Leadership Council guidance that explains all of that, which is something good to read if you run a construction site. We are moving into, we've got a couple of questions come up here. We're moving into the sort of practical area, I think, of our discussion. Mike's sending a question here. Do you have views on tasks requiring more than one engineer operating a buddy system with enhanced PPE, etc.? I mean, it's one of the questions I had down a little bit later on. It's a big concern. They're going to be traveling to work, so they're hoping travel separately. They're going to get into an environment where they're going to need to be working in close contact to each other. I mean, have we seen any clear guidance about two engineers working together?
No, as far as I can see so far, there hasn't been a clear guidance, and I understand that it's a kind of a shifting landscape, but there's got to be some clear guidance on it. And it's an interesting point that Mike was making in terms of enhanced PPE as well, because, you know, the FM profession, just as the health profession, clearly are going to have some issues in terms of sourcing PPE. And I was speaking to a contractor recently where they're having those problems of actually being able to get hold of PPE for their engineering team because of the national shortages. In terms of the practicalities of working on site, I think an important consideration as well, and this is something that I've heard recently, is the fact that there is a climate of fear out there, clearly, and people that are working in those particular environments have, sometimes will not be too receptive to having a cleaner or an engineer that is in close proximity to their desks. They will see that as a potential health threat, and particularly having two people there. Or you may have customers within a retail environment that almost policing it themselves and keeping a very close eye on things as well. And without that clear guidance, it's a very, very difficult environment that we could be sending employees into. And also, like we mentioned at the start of the conversation, some of these employees may be uncomfortable, actually, these engineers, and cleaning staff may be uncomfortable actually going into those kind of environments and may refuse to do so. But it is a very difficult one, really, for them to be able to operate within those environments, and whether that then is going to lead to a greater amount of out of hours working and kind of shift patterns. That may be something that happens, but again, is that going to increase the cost base? And that's another kind of important consideration as well. But it's uncharted territory, and it's, without that clear guidance, it's going to be people just seeing how they're getting on and trying to share that best practice if the kind of the clear guidance isn't coming from central authorities as yet on that really.
I just want to say welcome to Colin from Australia, who's joining us. The question has come in: how are you preparing for post-COVID return to work? What considerations regarding cleaning and other safe working practices could be put in place? And we had a talk off air through our number of concerns, which I think we will raise in this about returning to work in multi-floor businesses, high rise, where small lobbies, lift access, and we'll move on to that. But the cleaning seems to have jumped up, and I'm kind of not sure. Everyone seems to be able to now clean buildings to eradicate the coronavirus, but I've seen no testing pre the cleaning and no testing post the cleaning to confirm results before people are allowed back into the working place. So what's your experience in this area, and what effect have you seen that it's had in the market? I haven't worked out myself if I think it's a good thing or not.
No, and I think a significant number of companies within the sector have seen it as an opportunity really to kind of promote the products that they've got, you use these sprays and it can kind of eradicate the coronavirus really, but it's also to do with the working practices and how those people are actually going to be in those environments and how they're going to actually safely do their day-to-day job. Meeting rooms is a classic example of that. The social distancing side of things is really interesting, and how long that's going to be with us and how that's going to operate within the work environment. So, in preparation for today, I'm reading recently about the Harvard review, done some research on there, and they predicted that social distancing might be with us for another 2 years, depending on the different waves of the coronavirus that could come through, but also kind of whether it's going to be more prevalent in the kind of autumn or winter months, but also if there's going to be kind of influenza as well added to that, putting pressures on. So there's a whole range of different demands that are going to be putting on the system and how we operate that. And in terms of the cleaning side of things, so yeah, a lot of companies are looking at an increased specification and increased regime of cleaning, but also within the office environment, it's going to be the need for having a really kind of strong think about how you're going to redesign those office spaces. The Scottish government are getting some good press at the moment, I would say, in terms of they're being quite upfront about opening the discussions of what needs to be considered, perhaps more than the UK government, and seem to be leading the way a bit. But even like 2 weeks ago, they were saying we need to significantly look at the way that offices are designed and move away from open plan and more kind of more closed environments in terms of people, the way that people are working. Communal kitchen areas, things like that, that they may need to be closed down. How are you going to operate in kind of the toilet facilities as well as another key part of things? The use of, there's a lot of debate at the moment, and we've had it separately, Adam, previously about kind of the hand dryers and how kind of those automated hand dryers, could they potentially be viewed as a significant risk of spreading germs in the virus? So there's all these considerations that need to be considered, but also, like I mentioned just before, is how comfortable are people going to be seeing cleaning staff constantly going around their offices and in close proximity to them? That may make them feel a bit uncomfortable as well. So,
and this comes back to I think why and I won't go back over it, but the Section 44 has come into play around the safety of people and they're refusing to come back to work, which is going to become I think a real thing as we move into any form of lockdown, and this is where I've been looking at buildings as we said, sort of higher rise buildings, multi-floor, even multi-tenanted comes into this. Where if we take London as an example, you're coming into a very small entrance, probably with a couple of lifts, and you're transferring up and through the building. So just ask people to use the stairs is going to be quite difficult because there'll be a number of health reasons that you can't do that. On the flip side of that, if you can control their entrance by staggering their start times, what happens if there's a fire alarm? How are you going to ask people to social distance themselves in the case of an emergency and an evacuation procedure? These are all questions that are going through my mind, and I've seen some guidance for the construction. I've seen some guidance for building merchants. The British Retail Consortium have done social distancing for non-food retailers. I can't say I've seen anything that is going to support a facilities manager looking after a building at the moment, and that might be, let's be honest, it might be a good thing, because I'm not sure how they're going to do it yet with social distancing and redesigning. But have you seen anything that the people?
No, I haven't, Adam, and it's a really important point, really, and the discussion's got to start now, and the guidance has got to be coming through now. As always with FM, a lot of the focus is always on the physical assets of the building. So whether it be the ventilation systems and kind of thoughts in terms of saying, well, we need kind of fresh air intake, and we need to make sure that there's no recirculation of air within the workplace, and make sure there's correct procedure in place for kind of filter replacements as well, and looking at the air quality, how the water hygiene mechanism is going to be working, all those kind of things where it's talking about like mechanical, electrical, or potentially the water hygiene aspects of it, but actually practicalities of social distancing and ensuring that the correct kind of health and safety procedures are going to be adopted within these offices. The discussion hasn't been had and the guidance hasn't been had, and it is utterly crucial, because you're absolutely right. There's going to be these pinch points, whether it be lifts, whether it be passing each other on stairs, whether it be needing to go to the toilet, whether it be kind of catering and the need to go out. All these kind of things need to be really, really considered carefully before we kind of think about reoccupancy. And the discussions and the guidance needs to come now, really, because we could be in a situation in the next week or two where certain businesses are allowed to start kind of reoccupying some of the buildings, and you can't give it too much subjectivity in how that's adopted. There has to be some clear guidance, particularly from the HSE, as to how they think these buildings should be operating and what the best practice is to do it, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely going to be an ongoing discussion, and I think that's why we will probably run these discussions for the next couple of weeks on here, because I don't think anyone's got the right answers at the moment for everything. We're trying to use knowledge and understanding of the situation and trying to create safe working spaces, but you're adding public into that, and as we know, our focus, of how we can control the whole process. I mean, it's going to be really interesting, because the time, if we take somebody that's on furlough at the moment as an example, they're now possibly going to be asked to return to work. So they've done all of their own safety measures at home, so they've isolated themselves and their family, possibly being called back into work now, and unfortunately, if they catch the virus, it's probably going to be very easy to pinpoint that the return to work has had an impact on that. And now they've been classed as RID or reportable. We haven't had any of these yet, but legal cases or health and safety executive investigations into someone getting the virus at work. It's going to be, the whole challenge starts from how do you get people from their home to the office, into the office, to work, back out of the office. And it's going to be really difficult for an FM and a health and safety team to sort of interlink all of those points.
You're absolutely right. I heard a radio discussion recently where somebody was talking about they do not want to commute back to work and go on the underground, because they feel that is real risk and a worry to them. And in terms of the workplace as well, I think there'll be a lot of self-policing going on. But like you say, in terms of health and safety, will you have kind of almost like a requirement for companies to set up almost like a reportable near-miss situation where employees want to make where their employees aware of situations where social distancing hasn't, kind of happened as it should be. I think there'll be a lot of self-policing going on, but there'll be a lot of nervousness, like I said before, really, and supporting employees in that journey and making them feel comfortable within a building environment. Again, it's going to be a real challenge, because there'll be that nervousness of coming into close contact with people, which is unavoidable, really. They talk about schools trying to kind of self distance, which is going to be a challenge in itself. Offices are exactly the same, really. The need for keeping meetings, face-to-face meetings, to an absolute kind of minimum. Another thing that's been talked about, kind of 15-minute meetings face-to-face is going to be the maximum potentially. It's one guidance that may be coming out, but also the fact of, as I say, these kind of, you're going to be in close proximity to people that could be carrying the virus, and some employees may just feel on a well-being mental health point of view that it's too much of a stress for them, and their comfort zone and areas to work from home. And I think employers are going to be really needing to be sympathetic and react to that, really, and be flexible in terms of their approach to it.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're just trying to get through a couple more questions before we move on to some more some practical tips that finishes up. He's getting on. Collins asked whether there is any guidance around cleaning that's come out regarding healthcare workers, hospitals, aged care facilities. Have you seen anything?
I haven't personally seen anything. Can't profess to be an expert particularly on it, but I try and keep up to date with as much as possible, and I haven't seen anything as yet. Perhaps somebody kind of may be aware of something, but no, I haven't seen that. It like we said before, it's a constantly evolving, shifting ground, really, and I think companies are taking the lead from their FM providers to say this is what level of kind of requirement is going to be for the cleaning, and this is what we suggest it happens, really. So I think probably they're taking advice from the supply chain in terms of that, but in terms of clear government guidance and the like, as with cleaning, it's very much kind of based to the client's own specification as to what they want, really, rather than necessarily being dictated. It's easy in hard FM. You've got SFG 20, you've got an understanding as to what the specification could be. There's a lot more grey areas in terms of cleaning, what the specification should be, and how you ramp that up to deal with a virus of this nature.
if anybody out there has a guidance form that we don't know about, please send it through to me, and Colin, I'll obviously get that forwarded on to you after this, and we'll have a look for you as well, just see if I can see anything that's out there. One of the big things is confirming the right level of work, especially in hard FM during this point of view, and we're going to have to restart a number of buildings. So Abigail has talked around primary concerns around Legionella, HVAC systems. What are we going to be looking to do in that space? And obviously positive and negative air pressure in multi-tenanted buildings. I think multi-tenanted buildings are going to be on hold for a little bit longer, because and their guidance, until the guidance is out, we don't really know what's going to be happening. But I guess, it's a perfect time of year for growth of Legionella and bacteria in our system, because we've had a bit of warm weather. If you were reopening a building very quickly, what sort of guidance would you give people?
No, absolutely. It's something that as soon as lockdown happened and people talking about mothballing buildings, it's something that as a consultancy, Thomson FM, we were very much flagging as a concern. Really, is the fact of you still needing to flush these outlets back, and making sure that there isn't kind of the build-up of stagnant water and the Legionella risk that's associated with it. I think what you need to do as an FM really is to give yourself sufficient time to be able to investigate, to test the systems before your building is going to be coming operational, but also give yourself sufficient amount of time to deal with any remedial works that are coming out of that. I think it's simplistic to think that you're going to be able to do a quick test and then flip the switch and everything's going to be hunky-dory. It's not. There's going to be, heating, particularly on the ventilation side of things, and also on the water hygiene side of things, where they're going to need to be testing being done to make sure of the air quality, but also the systems are working correctly, but also the fact that there isn't any buildup of Legionella, and that they've got to be properly chlorinated, some of these tanks that haven't been used for a period of time as well. So it's specific to the buildings, but you've got to build in that time, like of being able to deal with some of the associated issues, because there will be some, undoubtedly, and you need to get some expert advice in terms of making sure that there isn't opening of the building is not kind of representing its own public safety risk in itself, because there are some really careful considerations that need to be done in terms of how that building's going to be operating from day one, but also operating in terms of the airflow, increasing filter changes, looking at how, making sure that there's no recirculation of air, things like that, opening the windows more, bringing in more fresh air in the right environments as well. These are all considerations, but I think the time now is to start planning for that. And whether organisations are planning to reopen in 30 days, or they have a plan for 60 days, or they have a plan for 90 days, I think we need to have those scenarios. And finally, Adam, the thing I would strongly suggest to all of them really is the fact of getting that risk register sorted now. Start thinking about identifying what those risks are, what the impact and likelihood is, and fundamentally getting the mitigation strategies in place right now, with a view to needing to reopen those at some point in the future, and being aware of what potential hazards there are that they've got to overcome.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. You've got to start talking about what demand you're going to have on your supply chain as well. So building your risk register, building your plan now, which has to be done now, because we can't delay. I think realistically, before we start turning taps on, we've still got probably a couple of months in there at the most to get this ironed out. We need to understand what demand we're going to go into the marketplace. We're going to have to work with our suppliers to understand when they're bringing people back into the business. We're going to have to start making sure that through the risk register they can enter the building safely. What's the opportune time to do this? Because there will be key holding responsibilities as well. They can't just turn up. They're going to have to be allowed in. What does that mean? And it starts from discussions today, doesn't it, with your businesses and understanding your building. So an asset register would be key. I'm guessing as a tool we're using at the moment. You're going to need what kind of tools do you think will make it easier to reoccupy your businesses as we move forward?
Well, like you mentioned, Adam, it's starting with the fundamentals really of knowing what you've got. The asset registers are absolutely critical. Working to a clear maintenance specification, but also the fact that there's going to be needs to be some flexibility and adaptability in terms of that maintenance strategy, because a post-lockdown partial occupancy is going to put certain areas under more critical pressure than others, really, and your maintenance strategy's got to adapt to that. So I think in terms of flexibility of approach, but a clear maintenance strategy needs to be in place. But also, the use of CAFM systems is utterly crucial, having a record of everything that needs to be done. And certainly one thing that will kind of happen, I suspect, is that there will be a build-up of backlog maintenance, because they haven't been able to do the kind of day-to-day repairs over a period of some months. Probably by the time that the buildings are going to be back in use, there's got to be needs for recording of those and understanding of what they've got and what potential budgets they're going to need for the future of those. But crucially, it's having a central record where we can prioritise those works going forward, really, and batching of those works, but to keep the kind of the supply chain utilised when they do arrive on site. So not just the PPM activities, but also key remedial tasks as well, and prioritising that. So I think that's the key part of it, really, is just having a central record and understanding exactly what they've got, what needs to be maintained, but also what work is fundamentally required going forward, really, and help them prioritise it.
And if, because a lot of businesses don't have that information, what advice would you give them now? How can they prepare themselves to come out of lockdown and get themselves up to a place where they can try and understand their estate and buildings a bit more?
Well, it's a difficult one, really, because, for example, as a consultancy, we do a lot of asset surveying, and we get our surveyors to go in and usually, for example, at the moment, we've been doing some surveying at some schools, both within England, but also over in Northern Ireland as well. And it's been kind of an ideal time for us to go in there and to do those asset registers and compilation of all that asset condition survey data and tagging, because there hasn't been anybody else around. I think at this moment in time, if you've got staff that potentially might be coming off furlough, you've got to kind of be ready for them to be understanding as to what works they potentially need to be doing. So I think practicalities, it might be difficult, but I think you've just got to try and where you can to get that asset information together from all your records, really. And it is a good time to be able to kind of look in terms of what you've got and organise what you've got, and seeing what records you do have. It's not going to be easy, but also a key part of it as well, Adam, is I would say for any FM, is identifying those critical assets that they've got. You might not have the time or the budgets to get every single piece of information you've got. You need to identify what the critical assets are and what needs to be correctly maintained and brought back into operation. There may be other assets that, with it being partially occupied, you don't need necessarily to bring into usage, but we'll continue with a kind of a mothball strategy on those. But clear identification of your critical assets is utterly important at this moment in time.
I just want to bring in Mike's question before we close. Obviously you're a member and an active part of the IWFM. Do you know if they're speaking to sort of any HSE or government to try and get extra guidelines?
Yeah, so by coincidence, I've actually got a board meeting tomorrow, so I can raise that very question that Mike's raised in terms of that. But I do know that, for example, Linda Housemanis and also Sophie Hooper has been in regular contact with government officials and the HSE in terms of what guidance needs to be given, really. So I'll ask the question. I do know conversations have been going, and I do know that what they've tried to do as much as they can is to give advice out, just as BESA and other organisations have been doing as well. It's trying to get that information and making sure that it's the most up to date and relevant, given what's the changing circumstances. But yeah, I do know that conversations are going, but I will kind of try and share what I know from conversations tomorrow in terms of what's in the pipeline for coming out in terms of guidance, because as we've discussed, that kind of HSE advice is utterly crucial for FMs when they're kind of getting ready to reoccupy these buildings, really, and not as I mentioned before, and I'm not leaving it to subjectivity, but having a clear guidance as to what needs to be done is really, really crucial, really.
But it supports in their plan building to communicate with the board of the business, to enable to open or understand the reasons why they're not in a position to open that building at the moment. And home working is still the best thing for their business.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a subject that, as I say, we're going to talk around a lot. I think the answers are still coming in. We've talked about a couple of bits of guidance today. So the Construction Leadership Council, the Builders Merchant Branch Operations that they've also got under there. We've got the BRC guidance. I think as FMs, we're going to have to sort of probably look at the Section 44 of the Employment Rights Act, just to understand how we can prove safety, and then through that risk register, have we actually proved that it's a safe environment?
Yeah,
right?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, and I would say obviously CIBSE as well have offered their own guidance, but it goes back to what we were saying as well before, Adam, in as much as that a lot of the guidance so far has been relating to physical assets and what needs to the shift and the pressure needs to be applied for, just giving us a clearer guidance in terms of how the buildings operate with people inside them and how those people are managed, and that risk, is fundamentally managed. So that's the key one, really, in terms of protecting people's health, protecting, making sure the risk of spread is utterly minimised, and the well-being of the staff is utterly crucial during this time, because the pressures on people and the worries of people can never be underestimated in this return to work. We're getting used to lockdown at the moment, the repetitive nature of our lockdown days, but soon that's going to be relaxed, and we're going to be getting used to some form of normality, and how we deal with that is going to be a challenge for everyone, really.
Well, it's interesting. You've seen it in retail, the focus moving away from the customer journey to people's safety. It's a massive switch in their own mindset. The customer journey is, how do I get them into my building safely to be able to get what they absolutely need and to leave safely. In there is nothing about enjoyment of the experience, which is everything was beforehand. And this is why this subject's gonna roll on. It's why I think there's always going to be two camps, one about the economy and one about life, and how we mix the two together. And how do we work through this? I mean, it's going to be to wrap up. There was something that came out the other day about if someone is taken ill during during the working time, how do you remove them and isolate them within the building safely? So do you create a designated space for them? And then how do you take them from that designated space to another place of isolation safely? Because companies have got to think about that. There are people that, as we say, show very little symptoms until a turning point. If they're in your working environment, what then happens for that person? Then what happens to the people around them? And then what happens to the office space that's around them regarding cleaning? It's going to rumble on. Mark, I just want to thank you for all your help and advice today.
Thank you.
I think we've got through everybody's questions, so thank you very much for your questions. Make a really interesting conversation, and look out for the advertising sort of for next week, because I think we're going to build on this over the coming weeks and sort of look at some more technical side of the guidance that's been coming out, because it's really hit home with a number of people how difficult and complex, but how important this part of our journey is going to be next. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you next week. Take care. Bye.
Thank you.